Handle your high with Tadayoshi. All right, welcome back to the show. Hey, today I have a special guest, Alan Stein Jr. Alan Stein, you're a motivational speaker. I didn't know much about you until we have a mutual friend, David Meltzer. Awesome guy, my mentor, wonderful fellow, and I'm so glad that he suggested that you be on the podcast. And when I looked you up, you had just a plethora of really wonderful, interesting experiences with top-level athletes and champions and industry people and all kinds of just the kind of guy that I like to talk to, because I'm always talking about mindset and positivity and what kinds of things, what it takes to be a champion or successful, and that's like your topic. So tell everybody in your words what you do, and just for those of my listeners who may not know who you are, may not be familiar with some of your work, who you've worked with, and what are some of the things that you do.
Sure, and you are right. That is right in my wheelhouse, and that is certainly something that gets me motivated every single morning, and I'm thankful David connected us as well. I spent 20 years in the basketball performance space, so I'm very familiar with the fitness industry and with improving performance from a physical and a mental standpoint. And I specialize primarily in basketball, and was very fortunate to have an opportunity to work alongside and observe firsthand the best players and coaches in the game of basketball. I'm sorry to interrupt, but I think I saw pictures or some videos of you with like Kobe Bryant and some other some big time NBA players. And these are the kinds of people that you've worked with and been around and have gotten a chance to observe and extract the wonderful stuff of success, right? Yeah, absolutely. And from there I just decided to take everything that I had learned through the game of basketball and through those players and coaches, and a couple of years ago decided to transfer that over to the corporate space, and now serve as a professional keynote speaker, run workshops and trainings, just authored a new book called Raise Your Game, which same thing, basically translating everything that I'd learned through sport and through basketball, and show folks how to apply those to their lives, to their businesses, and to their craft, regardless of what someone wants to improve their performance in. The principles and strategies of high performance and of high achievement are the same in any industry. So that's really what I do now is I just translate all of those messages that I learned on the court and show folks how to use those to better their own lives. So you do you primarily work with people in industry, or do you work with athletes still as well? No, I don't. I don't do much in the athlete space anymore. Something had to give, and decided to put everything into this new venture. So most of my work now is with, I just call it the corporate space. I mean, it doesn't have to be a for-profit business, but I don't do much on court or in the weight room anymore, other than what I do for myself just to stay fit. Oh. Well, when you think of some of the applicable tools that you sort of talk about with a lot of people, what's on the top of the list in terms of if you were trying to describe to somebody some of the modalities or some of the tools that you give people, what would be like on the top of the list in your mind? The first one is what I actually learned directly from Kobe Bryant the first time I had a chance to watch him work out, and that's the best never get bored with the basics. That whatever it takes to be successful in any industry or in any craft, you have to be willing to acknowledge that the basics work, and you have to make sure you have the discipline to stick to them continuously and consistently. And even if you talk about fitness and bodybuilding and so forth, I mean, the basics work. They always have, and they always will. And it's a dangerous trap and a pitfall to feel like you need to skip over the basics and to constantly chase what's flashy and what's sexy and what's shiny, because the basics work. I mean, at the end of the day, if you progressively overload the muscular and cardiovascular system and you eat a clean diet and you do those two things consistently, you'll achieve a pretty high level of fitness. And I know that's a very, wide net to cast when talking about it. And I'm certainly not trying to diminish the intricacies of something like bodybuilding or fitness. But if you don't do those things, then it doesn't matter what you put on top of that. You won't be able to achieve those results. So it's all about making sure the basics create the foundation to which the rest of the house is built. And when you master the basics and continue to stick with them, then and only then can you start to add, say, in this case, more advanced training techniques or more advanced derivatives of your diet and do those things. But if you don't do the basics, then the advanced stuff doesn't matter.
For you, what's the? I totally agree, 100%, 1,000% that you really do have to have a constant. You have to be in constant contact with some of the fundamentals, the basics of whatever it is you're in, whatever industry, whatever sports you're in. If you're out of touch with that, then you're probably going to be out of touch with what you're doing here pretty quick. But for you, when you think of it philosophically, what is the basics for you? Like, forget about a particular industry, but what's the is there? Can we classify it that way? Can we speak about it in general terms like that?
For sure. And we can definitely talk in generalities, but the main takeaway is for someone to look at the specific area that they want to improve, and then they need to get surgical precision with what the basics are of that, because they will change slightly. But I'll give you two examples. One, just a basic component of running any business, but particularly a service-based business like professional speaking, is to deliver more in value than you take in payment. Like, that is a basic philosophy. But no matter how much someone pays me for a keynote talk, I go above and beyond to make sure that I'm delivering more in value than they're going to pay me. And that part of that has to do with the due diligence I do beforehand, and making sure that I'm learning their audience or learning their company, and learning it so I know what their problems are and their challenges are. I know what it is that they're trying to achieve after I work with them. All the way through my preparation, which will include, the research and the due diligence, but also includes the rehearsal and the practice to make sure that I'm going to deliver, on point and on time. That also includes follow-ups and being able to have reinforcement tools, both in person and digitally, to make sure that whatever it is that I'm sharing, that it's not just a one-time song and dance, that it's going to be something that I can have touch points after my talk to make sure that stuff gets implemented. And, when I take all of that stuff together, I work very hard to make sure that value will exceed what it is that I'm asking for in payment. And if most people agree that they received more in value than they gave in payment, then you're going to be able to stay in business. As soon as those two things get flipped, you're going to be in trouble. And another practical example that I use all the time, and this is not just for myself, but I believe is a basic of anyone that's in a leadership position, is the skill of active listening. That you have to be a world-class listener if you want to be a world-class leader. That you have to have a pulse of the people that are following you. So a pulse of your team or a pulse of your organization. You have to be willing to ask them the right questions at the right time. And then you have to care enough to genuinely listen to what it is that they're saying and process that, and then act accordingly. So, I find that whether you're the head coach of a basketball team, you're a personal trainer that's working with an individual client, or you're the CEO or entrepreneur, of your organization, that being able to listen, and in the business world, listening to your prospective clients and customers is every bit as important as listening to those on your team. Listening is one of the basic skills that's required for being successful.
I think you're absolutely right, man. I mean, if there's one complaint, I hate to say complaint, but there's one criticism I'd have of contemporary culture, at least today, since technology has been really, our cell phones and these things really have been contributing to the sort of the lack of focus, I think, and to a certain degree, people are being distracted. I mean, I go to a restaurant and I sit down and I see couples on dates or families, and everybody's on their phone. Now, they have the right to be on their phone. This is America. I mean, they can do what they like, but it certainly isn't contributing to a good line of communication. And half the time they're on their phone, they're either texting somebody else or they're on social media. And I want to go up to them and tell them, "Hey, this is a social situation right now."
Absolutely.
You're in it. But I kind of feel
here, let me say this, because you're 100% right on that. And I think that's a good thing for guys like us, because it makes it easier for us to separate from everyone else. And I'm a huge believer in separation. And I ultimately think life is like a game of musical chairs. And I'm sure a lot of your listeners haven't played musical chairs for a while, but I have 3 young kids, so I'm still very familiar with the game. And, there's a lot more people, that type of stuff. And, well, in musical chairs, there's a lot more people than there are chairs.
Right.
That's the reason you get that anxiety attack when the music stops. Well, it's like that in any opportunity. If you want to have a really fulfilling relationship, either with your children or with your significant other, if you wanted to be really connected to those on your team, either in sport or in business, or to your clients and customers, then listening becomes even more important. And because there's so many digital distractions, and because fewer people are actually paying attention and giving their attention, you can be a shining star because you'll be one of the few that does. And I'm a firm believer that the number one gift we have to give another human being is our attention in the present moment. Amen. That is the most valuable thing we can give another human being. And the more people are allowing themselves to get distracted and the more they're staring at their phones, the more valuable the attention becomes. So now I'm on my phone a fairly decent amount. I use technology like social media to engage with others and to learn and to build my business. But I'm incredibly conscious of the fact that tool can be a wedge between actively listening and giving my attention to the people that matter most. So I've got this heightened sensitivity to making sure that I'm not on it that much. And for me, I just put rules in place. If you and I were going to go grab lunch together, I would just leave my phone in the car. Therefore, even if I'm tempted to look at it, I can't because it's not on me. And I would be giving you what you deserve, which is my full undivided attention.
I agree 100%. I think those are, I think that's a really great sort of rules of engagement. I think we should all have rules of engagement for ourselves, right? Like, so that we can keep ourselves directed in the ways that we want. I being just like you, interacting with so many people throughout the course of the year, and in my career, I do notice that there is the art of listening is rare. It's rare. And the people that you do find who are good listeners, you just want to interact with those people. You just want to interact with those people. So what is some of the advice that you give people? Because I'm always trying to become a better listener. I've found that the more I listen, the more I learn, but also the better my podcasts are, the better I feel about them, the better people feel about me. And man, I find that I don't want to hear myself talk nearly as much as I used to. Right. Well, what's your biggest advice on how to develop that skill? Because I think it's a skill, right? Like it's a skill.
It's absolutely a skill. And like any skill, as you just alluded to so insightfully, the only way to improve is through purposeful practice. And one of the things that I used to tell my athletes and I tell my children now and I tell Fortune 500 companies when I go to speak is, and this is so true in the fitness and bodybuilding world, as you know, repetition is not punishment. Repetition is the mother of all skill. Repetition is the oldest and most effective form of learning on the planet, and that's never going to change. So if you want to get good at active listening, then you have to practice the skill of listening. And you just took the first step, which is the hardest one, which is acknowledging that it's something that you want to improve on. It's having the awareness to know that even if you're a great listener, you can still get better. And that's how I am now. Listening has been something that I've been focusing on for the last couple of years. And I'm not a world-class listener at present, but I'm a much better listener than I was a year ago. And I can promise you that if you and I have a conversation a year from today, I'll be an even better listener then because it's something that I'm focused on improving. So once you have the awareness to realize it's something that you need to improve, then you need to make sure that you're getting in reps of purposeful practice. And the beautiful part is, anytime someone's speaking, it's a chance for you to work on your craft and sharpen your sword. So whether you're having a chat with a child or your significant other or a buddy at work, or, if you're a trainer and you're training your client, every time somebody's speaking to you, you have an opportunity to practice the skill of listening. And, well, for me, and I think a lot of people a lot of people have fallen in this trap. I would usually look at listening as simply a placeholder until it was my turn to talk.
Exactly.
That while you were speaking, instead of me really trying to learn from you and really trying to connect, I was just waiting for you to finish because I was already formulating my response. And for a lot of people, that's a big problem. And you can see how almost exhausting that is, because now not only do I have to try and focus my own thoughts, I'm trying to predetermine what it is that you're going to say so that I can then have a rebuttal. It's almost like I'm responsible for being inside of both of our heads.
We're trying to architect this conversation in such a way that highlights whatever attributes you want or whatever outcomes you want. And you're right. exhausting, completely, and usually fruitless.
Well, here's a couple things too that I've found about listening, and one tool that's actually very practical that you hopefully will find helpful as well as your listeners, because it certainly helped me, is what's called a list back. And a list back means when a list, L-I-S-T, list back, when there's an appropriate break in the conversation, because certainly you don't want to interrupt somebody, but when there's an appropriate break, you list back in the speaker's words exactly what it is that they said. So I would say something to the effect of, Tad, I wanted to make sure I heard you correctly. You said you want to improve active listening because you want to make sure that you're learning everything you can from a conversation. Is that correct? And this will do a couple things. One, it'll give you a chance to either confirm that I have the right information and I did hear you correctly, or it gives you an easy out to be able to correct me. If for any reason I heard you wrong, if for any reason I did zone out for 20 seconds and I missed the most important nugget of what you said, it'll give you a chance to say, if I say, Tad, I want to make sure I heard you correctly. You said A, B, and C. Is that right? That'll give you a chance to either say, yes, Alan, that's correct, or no, Alan, I said A, B, and D. Either way, it makes sure that I have the information correctly. And this is a way to help measure, because when you start doing this in a lot of conversations, you'll start to see your accuracy go up. You'll start to see that you're getting it right the first time more often than not. But way more important than that is something that you alluded to earlier, is when you give someone your full attention in the present moment and you're actively listening and you list it back, you send a very powerful unconscious message to them. And that message is, I care about you.
Right. Exactly.
I value what you have to say. What you're saying is important to me. And that is a glue that will strengthen any human connection in any relationship. So when you list back, you improve your accuracy and you make a deposit to the other person by showing them you care.
I think it's I used to do this in relationships. I still kind of do. It's hard if the other person is not a good listener, but because if they're just waiting to speak, which, this is just the state of affairs that we live in. But I definitely agree. I mean, I definitely find right on point. I have been, I think when I was in my 20s, I was probably not the greatest listener. I was just, I think I wanted to be, I'm 48 now, but I definitely wanted to be, I was just waiting for my turn to speak. And, and I catch my girlfriend, she tells me the same kinds of things now, that she's like, and I'll go, honey, you're interrupting me. And she'll say, I didn't want to forget this one thing. I'm like, if you forget by the time you get a chance to speak, it probably isn't as important as you thought. It's like, I was like,
absolutely.
Because the really important stuff, besides when somebody's speaking, you can tell me from your perspective, but when somebody else is speaking, what you have to say isn't important.
Yeah. And, in a casual conversation, it's a little bit different than in a business conversation. Right. But I tell you what, if this was a business conversation, if you were considering hiring me to come in as a speaker, I would actually ask your permission and say, hey, during this pre-event call or pre-event lunch, if we were in person, do you mind if I take a few notes? Because I just want to make sure I have everything correctly. And assuming you're cool with that, then I don't have to worry about forgetting. You say something to the effect of that your team has been having some issues with accountability. And instead of me trying to remember that and hold on to that nugget, I just write down accountability and I'm still fully engaged. I'm still giving you my full attention in the present moment, and I'm taking notes, which will help when it comes to the list back portion, but it'll also alleviate the anxiety that I'm not going to remember everything. And then I've got a detailed documentation of what it is that we said. And I will end the chat with, I just want to make sure that I've heard you correctly. I just want to kind of summarize our talk today. Tad, you said that you had this, this, and this, and that your team needs this, this, and this, and you're hoping that my talk would help them achieve this, this, and this. Is that correct? And I'm telling you, unconsciously, you're going to go, wow, Alan really cares about me. He is really sharp. Yeah. Any doubt that I had about bringing him in to talk to my company has now been eradicated because this guy understands me and he understands us. And ultimately, that's how you want to make the speaker feel. And, I did spend a good portion of time, even before I started working with teams. I mean, I was basically a personal trainer. Now, I specialized in working with athletes, but it would be me and one basketball player, one-on-one for an hour, whether I was taking them through a strength training workout or an agility workout. It would just be us. And once again, I mean, the listening is crucial to strengthening that relationship and that connection. And it's not even just expecting that person to talk. It's also making sure that you're asking insightful questions so that they have something to share, and you're digging deeper into how you can better serve them.
I think it's interesting you bring that up. I'm glad you brought that up because I would have this question because working with that, I work primarily with athletes, but I do work with a lot of normal people who just want to be like athletes, live the lifestyle, lose weight or feel good. But the majority of the people that I've worked with over the years have been professional athletes or top-level amateur athletes. And so they kind of have a very different mindset, especially when it comes to coaching, when it comes to somebody who's giving them advice. People who this has been my experience, you tell me from your experience, but on my experience, especially professional athletes who worked on teams, they're much more coachable. So so they have developed a certain degree of listening skills. When a coach is speaking or somebody of authority who's giving them tools, they recognize this. They do it consciously or unconsciously. They recognize it, and then their ears. They're all ears. They're tuned into you. That's a very different kind of modality than say somebody who's maybe an executive a sales executive at a company, or just a normal person who wants to improve the way that they are in their life and be more successful, because they don't seem many times that there's not that translation. Like sports, I've found being in sports my whole life, it definitely lends itself to teaching certain skills. So how would you translate that? Because I find that people who are on teams and athletes, they just tend to be better listeners when it comes to being coached. They want to hear the information. How do you make that transition, or do you have to, or tell me what your insight is on that?
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, I think sports is a tremendous platform for teaching life lessons. And I do, now that I'm in the corporate space, have found it much easier and much more seamless to plant those seeds with folks that have some experience in sport, because they do understand certain concepts like being coachable, like accountability and so forth. But even those that weren't, it's not just relegated to sport. I mean, really, even if you were, if when you were in high school, you wanted to be a concert pianist or a violinist, or you wanted to be an actor in theater, on some level, you still needed to be able to take instruction and still needed to be able to take coaching. And I think the word coaching tends to have a connotation that most people think of sport when they hear it. But actors and actresses need coaches. Musicians need coaches. Really anyone that wants to perform at a higher level needs someone that can provide instruction, that can provide motivation, someone that can help hold them accountable. So what I found, and really in order to be coachable, you need to have humility. You have to have an openness. You have to recognize the fact that you don't have all of the answers, and that you need to be open to someone else being able to help you. And I mean, even in the, keep going back to fitness, even in the training relationship, if you're preparing for a bodybuilding show and you have a trainer or a coach, you have to be open with humility to the fact that this person has some things that can help you, and they can see things that you can't see. We all have blind spots, and by definition, you can't see what's in your blind spot. That's why it's a blind spot. But you can acknowledge that you have them, and you can try to insulate yourself with people who can see your blind spots. And to me, that's a key to high performance. The highest performers and achievers that I've ever been around, and all of those that I've studied, have always been very open to coaching.
Yeah, it's kind of funny you mentioned blind spots. It takes me back to when I learned how to drive, right? And when I was, and I didn't get my driver's license until I was 17. So I remember my grandmother hired you get in the car with some gigantic boat car with two steering wheels on one side, and this older fella, and he's always hitting the brakes, and it was just kind of a funny, kind of a comedic sort of couple of weeks for me. But I scored a perfect on my tests on all my license because of it. But I could remember driving with my grandmother after I got my license, or when I was learning through this process, and she says, "Don't forget to check your blind spots." And I'm like. And I kept thinking, being the 17-year-old kid, Mr. Know-It-All that I thought I was, and the world, when you're younger, I think you just process information quicker. I know I process information quickly. So it's like, man, I know where everything's at. I know where everything's at. And then I remember switching lanes, and I almost sideswiped a car because I didn't see something in my blind spot because I didn't look. And since that day, I've looked every single time on both sides because I will not take that chance again. But it took me almost an accident to get to that. I didn't take it on somebody else's word. But it was an eye opener for me. It was like, okay, I need to listen to the people who know what they're talking about because I could have just gotten to an accident. And so I think sometimes it takes an eye-opening experience to like be that, to really, really be coachable. Because I think some people, like myself at that time, just thought that, hey, I got this covered. Like I could do this, like I got it covered and I'll pick up what I don't know, and I was wrong. I needed to be, and I think one of the things that I think is most interesting today, we call them coaches, but really they're mentors, aren't they? Like really, they're just like professional mentors. And one of the, I think, I listen to Gary Vee, I listen to all these people, and with some of the things that Gary Vee says, and of course David Meltzer says, and many other people who are like this. They say, people ask them, what do I do? How I want to be successful. What's the first bit of advice you can give me? And they always say, get a mentor or a coach. Like essentially the same thing, right? I mean, would you agree?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. You need someone else that can pour into you and someone that's already walked the path that you're going to walk. That's crucial. Sometimes making those mistakes that we need to make. For me, that almost mistake was invaluable. I would not trade it for anything in the world because it taught me so much. Because I've never been in an accident, knock on wood, in my whole life. I've had one ticket in my entire life, so like I really have been an excellent driver. But it's because of my near miss, right? So when people today, like, what is your take? I was really excited to have this particular interview today because I wanted to hear your perspective on some of the athletes because I really, really know with every fiber in my being that I'm in a sport. The sport of bodybuilding, as you know, it's an aesthetic sport. It's a sport of you develop a physique, and it's about what you show, and that's an opinion. And so, but I know that all the greatest champions that I know, myself included, you got to develop a crystal clear image in your head before it can ever materialize in your body. So, do you see this with some of the athletes? Like, what's your take on this, and how would you describe this process of? It's kind of a visualization, but it really is being crystal clear about what you want to pursue, and then just moving forward. What's your take on that? Describe that in your words. For sure. I mean, vision is crucial. I mean, you have to know where it is that you're going, and you have to also have incredibly high self-awareness to know where you are. It's no different than using your phone for GPS to get somewhere. I mean, there's two things that you have to know. You have to know where you're going, and you have to know where you are, because if you don't, it'll change the perspective. I mean, if you lived in Los Angeles and I lived in New York, and someone asked both of us for directions to Chicago, they would be different because we'd have different starting points. We'd have different vantage points. So the end result, or the end address might be the same, but we'd have a completely different perspective. So both are crucial, and you do have to be able to visualize the outcome that you want. What the desired outcome, but then what's crucial is not just falling in love with the outcome, it's falling in love with the process of what it would take to get there. So those are the steps, or each little turn, hey, go 2 miles and turn left on this road and go there. You have to fall in love with the process. And one of the things I've always admired about the bodybuilding world is how process driven it is, that the outcome is you want to look a certain way on this one day on stage. That's the outcome. But the only way you can do that is by loving the process. Clearly, bodybuilding is not something that you can cram last minute for. If you're going to take 6 months to get ready for a show and you only start dieting and training in the last month, you're going to be in a little bit of trouble. So you have to wake up every single morning and go, what do I need to do today? From a nutrition standpoint, from a workout standpoint, what do I do today that's part of my process that will get me closer to being show ready in 6 months? And it doesn't leave you very much wiggle room if you fall off for a few days, and it's important to be able to, and that's why you have to have that plan, because you have to be able to work backwards so that you can say, okay, on this day, I'm going to train these body parts, or I'm going to do this type of cardiovascular, or this is what I'm going to be eating. And then here's how that's going. My diet's going to change for the 6 months leading up to the show. Here's how my workouts are going to change leading up to it. So you have to have that plan in place. And ultimately, the outcome of getting on stage and doing your thing is simply the reward for having paid your dues during the process. And I will say that is one of the biggest differences between bodybuilding and some of these other sports. Is in the other sports, there's a mathematical winner and loser. Whoever scores more points wins, whoever doesn't loses. And you are right. In bodybuilding, because it's an aesthetic sport, it is more subjective. It's in the eye of the beholder. Now, certainly at the higher levels, these judges have such a trained eye that it's probably fairly accurate, but it's still not 100% accurate. But that's even more reason that you can't get too caught up in the process. You have to control what you can control, which is your own attitude and effort and preparation, and then just let the chips fall where they may.
You're absolutely right. I'm a judge. I'm a pro judge. I've judged pro shows, and I tell athletes all the time. And they say, "Oh, well, why did I place this way? Or why did I get this placing?" And I say, "Well, that day, this is what it looked like, and it doesn't necessarily mean anything more than that. And it is an opinion. Right. It is an opinion. Like the difference is that." When I'm on the judging table, my opinion counts and yours doesn't. Like that's the
right.
When it just comes to the who's going to get first, second, third, fourth, or fifth, or whatever, it doesn't mean. I like to tell people, look, man, success has more to do with you, just what you said, loving the process. It has to do with how you feel about what you're doing. This is the way I say it. I love the way you said it because I thought I was the only guy that would tell people this. Like people say, well, I want to get my pro card. How do I become successful with this? I say, look, fall in love with the process. If you fall in love with the day-to-day stuff that you have to do to get to where you want, then getting to where you want becomes a consequence. You just get there. You just get. You don't care when you get there. It's like,
no, and the hard part about it, and this is one of the things that that just from being a novice student of the game, that's so hard about bodybuilding is the process is usually mundane. It's tedious. It's monotonous. It's eating the same foods over and over and doing the same types of workouts and doing multiple sets to try and tweak this one lagging body part. Like, I get it. And that's why becoming a champion bodybuilder is so challenging, because you have to fall in love with the basics. It's no different than a basketball player that's already at the NBA All-Star level, working on their footwork for 15 minutes every single day, working on just basic pivoting drills or basic offensive moves, because that's the foundation to which everything else is built. And it's kind of the law of attrition. Most people will get bored eating the handful of simple foods that you're supposed to eat, or doing, they're going to get bored with that. And when they get bored with it and they start to deviate, that's when you can catch them by just sticking to the process. And it's definitely not easy, but it's so important for people to understand that basic and easy are not synonyms. Those do not mean the same thing. I could tell you this, that, and before anyone throws anything at the speakers, what it takes to be an elite bodybuilder is basic in principle, but it is incredibly challenging to do. It's anything but easy, but it's very basic. In fact, I'm willing to bet you could probably write down a program, both dietary and workout-wise, that's fairly basic in nature. And if someone stuck to that for every calorie and every rep, and they did so consistently, they would look phenomenal. Because it's basic what's need to be done. But doing the basics is anything but easy.
You're absolutely right. You're 100% right. I tell people, look, the only way you can fail this is if you don't do it. The problem isn't that you don't have the things in front of you that you know what to do. The problem is that it's just doing it. Because through the course of life, we get distracted. People get torn away. They make other choices. And I said, look, the winning is great, but you being a winner, in my opinion, it's something you feel every day. It's that love for the game. It's the love for what you're doing. And when it comes to bodybuilding is a little interesting. This whole fitness competition, whether it be bodybuilding or figure or bikini or whatever division, it's a little different because it infiltrates every aspect of your life. So you can't just like go out and party. Even if you didn't eat anything or drink anything, you still have to be able to rest and recover and manage stress hormones and all these things that most people just are oftentimes unwilling to do, or at least not really willing to really recognize how important those things can be in their program. So in life too, I find that that's kind of the same deal, that we want these, like you said, I think you hinted earlier, we sort of have this culture that wants a lot of quick quick successes, quick hits. They want the magic bullet. They want the drug that's going to help them. They want the whatever that's going to like give them all the stuff of life that they dream about. When there's a reason why like you said, like I think there's an inverse. There's a equation can be built that says that the amount of effort required to achieve something is sort of almost proportional to the amount of satisfaction that's derived from it, because what it's worth intrinsically, the value that it intrinsically has to you, the less you put into it, the less intrinsic value it has to you, no matter how great the reward is. Like, does it really mean that much when Warren Buffett like earns an extra $10 million? No, but it would change my life. But it wouldn't change his. Like, he doesn't care. He doesn't care if he earns another probably $100 million. Like, it doesn't really matter to him. But to me, it'd be something different. So it's different. But when you look at some of these kinds of concepts, because in bodybuilding, I get it, in fitness and competition. I'm just curious, like in basketball and stuff, is it do some of these athletes struggle with the same kinds of things? Because I could totally see how process and working on basics and drilling and doing these things that you're enculturated into a philosophy that really reinforces, hey, basics, you got to continue to do this stuff. You got to sharpen your sword, and the only way, it's going to get dull, right? Like, you got to keep working on footwork, got to keep working on drills, on dribbling, on shooting, on free throws, on whatever it is that you're. So like, in bodybuilding, sometimes you tweak things. Sometimes there's some basic stuff, but at the core of it, it's really the lifestyle as a whole that you really have to sort of embrace. How is that in basketball? Is it a common play, or do guys think that there's magic bullets there too?
Well, no, and it's the same across the board. Not even just in basketball, but I mean, it's the same in life as well. I mean, in order to be a high performer and a high achiever in anything, then you have to be willing to be unique. You have to be willing to make sacrifices. You have to be willing to go headfirst into some adversity and to some discomfort. I mean, those things are a given. But once again, even some of the things that you just highlighted right there are very basic in principle. Get 8 hours sleep every single night. You can't get any more basic than that. But that is not easy to do. Not if you're younger and you want to have a social life and you want to go out with others, or maybe you have a young child. So getting 8 hours of sleep is really challenging because kids tend to not sleep very well early on. So there's a lot of different things that can get in the way of that. But it's the same thing for anyone that wants to perform. I mean, if you want to be great in business, well, you have to make sure that your bucket is full. You have to make sure that you're doing everything, not just to physically be at your best, but to mentally and emotionally and even spiritually be at your best. So it's not really that much different. I mean, you've got to feed your mind and feed your soul and feed your body with what you need to perform at your highest level, even in something like business. And, clearly in the physical, we get that. If you don't eat the right fuel, you'll never have the energy required to work out at the right intensity level that you need. Whether it's basketball or bodybuilding, it'd be the same thing. Well, it's the same thing in any area of our life. If you're just feeding yourself the equivalent of mental and emotional junk food all of the time, you'll never be able to perform at your best. So all of these things, so they require sacrifice. So if you want to step on stage in 6 months from now and be the best you can be, well, then you probably can't go partying on Friday and Saturday nights. Now, is that a sacrifice that you are willing to make? It's a yes or a no. And what's funny is most people, there's not an alignment between what they say and then what they do. They say they want to win that bodybuilding championship in 6 months, but then their behavior actually undermines that. Well, it's the same thing in business. In order for you to be the best and lead your team, you have to be emotionally, mentally, and physically fit. So you have to take time out of your schedule to recharge your own battery if you want to lead this organization. And when you take that time, that's going to take away from something else. So maybe you don't have time to watch 2 hours of TV every night, or to watch, an entire Sunday's worth of football games, or, maybe you can't do some of the things that other people can do because you've chosen a path to pursue excellence in this specific thing. And, like Tom Brady, for example. I mean, he's arguably the best to ever do it. He's at the peak of his career and he's in his early 40s. He's able to enjoy the fruits of his success but he hasn't been able to live a normal person's life for the last 15 years. The discipline that it takes for him to get in the shape he is in means he can't do the same things that normal people walking the street do. But then again, he doesn't have the same things that normal people walking the street have. So the ability to make sacrifices, to go after what you want, is crucial. Now, for most people, being the number one bodybuilder in the world 6 months from now is not on their target list. So they don't have to necessarily be as strict as someone who wants to win that bodybuilding championship would be. So there's a level of there's a spectrum. If your goal is simply to be, the best CEO you can be, to be a loving husband and to be a great father, then you probably don't have to eat the same diet that you would need to eat to be the number one bodybuilder in the world. But you probably should still make choices to eat healthy so that you have the energy to do those three things, so that you're fit enough. So it's all a spectrum. So this doesn't mean that everyone has to follow the same type of regimented lifestyle as a bodybuilder, or that everyone has to be as dedicated as Tom Brady. But as you just said, there's a direct correlation between what it is that you want to achieve and the sacrifices that you need to make. The higher the level of something you want to achieve, the more sacrifices you have to make.
Absolutely. I think the disconnect for a lot of people is that they don't realize that those sacrifices oftentimes come in the form of going against some of the desires and things that we have at the moment. And that almost always, you said it earlier, you used the word uncomfortable. And I like that, because I've told people, look, if you really want to change your body, change your life, whether it be your career, your relationships, or just your body, you're going to have to enter what I call the uncomfortable zone. You got to enter this place that you literally have to kill the old guy or gal and bring to life the new person. You literally have to do this. How do you describe this with some of the people that you've worked with, or how do you describe this in your way?
Well, similar to the world that you've come up through, me being a former basketball performance coach, we realize that, in order especially to change the physiology of our body, discomfort's not a nice to have. It's a requirement. I mean, the only way you can change your musculoskeletal system is through discomfort. I mean, anyone that done a set of bicep curls or a set of bench presses knows there's going to be some burning and some shaking, and your muscles are going to be on fire. But those are the repetitions that make you stronger. Those are the repetitions that are actually going to induce the physical change. So what I tell folks all the time, if you're going to make a change, there is going to be some discomfort. We can't do anything about that. That is now a fact of life. But what we can do is change how we view discomfort.
Yes.
And instead of trying to resist it, and instead of trying to be fearful of it, we can simply embrace it and just realize that it's going to be a short-term prerequisite to what it is that we want. I keep a fairly decent level of fitness for someone that doesn't compete in anything. And yeah, even for me, after doing this for 25 years, those last couple of reps are incredibly uncomfortable. I don't love them any more than the next person, but I've learned to program myself to the fact that they'll be over soon. It's almost done. And these are the ones that are actually making me better. In fact, the 10 that I did that there wasn't any burning or shaking aren't doing much to change my physiology. It's these last one or two that are going to be doing all of the work. And I remember seeing, and I'll butcher it slightly, but I remember hearing one time about Muhammad Ali in his heyday, and a reporter said to him something of the effect of, how many sit-ups do you do in a set? And he said something like 25. And Porter was confused. They're like, 25? I mean, you're one of the best athletes in the world. You're the best boxer of all time. How are you only doing 25 sit-ups? And he said, I only start counting when they become excruciatingly uncomfortable. So that means he probably did 200, but he doesn't even count those because he knows those aren't going to help him. He only started counting when they got really hard. And it's the same thing from a discomfort standpoint. We have to be willing to embrace discomfort, but know that it's only going to be short term. It's not permanent, but the result we'll get could be permanent if we stick with it continuously. And that's just another case of a sacrifice that has to be made. I'm going to sacrifice my temporary comfort in order to get something that I want really, really badly.
I'm curious how you handle, because this brings up, for me, this conjures up excuses. I hear excuses a lot, and I tell people, look, I've had little battles with my girlfriend about this too. I said, look, it doesn't matter if the excuse is good, valid, or true. an excuse is still an excuse. So I don't really, so how do you handle or work with excuses? When somebody says, oh yeah, I just don't have time for this, or whatever, it doesn't matter what the excuse, I'm just using that as an example, but it could be anything. And it could be a really good one. Like you said, like, oh yeah, my kids kept me up all night, or because I tell my athletes, you got to get 7 to 8 hours. There's just no way 2 weeks before a show, you got to get it. You won't drain fluid correctly. You won't look right. It's just you're just not going to look as good as you will if you got, so whatever you got to do, get it in. But what's your take on excuses?
Well, first is I get them to own it and get them to acknowledge it. And, I would say, 99.9% of the time, we can change can't to won't. So don't say I can't do another rep. Just say I won't do another rep. And that's fine. Own it. I'm not going to judge you. If you want to give up early and not finish this set, there's nothing wrong with that. But don't say it's because you can't do it. We both know, and I know this is not politically correct, but we both know if I put a gun to your head right now, you could do another rep. Yeah. So don't say can't. Just simply say won't and start to own it. And there's not many people in the pursuit of excellence or the pursuit of high performance that can look in the mirror and tell themselves won't and be able to live with themselves. So first is getting them to own it. The other, though, is still having some compassion. I mean, I'm a human being. I'm fallible. There are plenty of times throughout a day where I'm going to think I can't, or I'm going to make up an excuse as well. And I have to take that same medicine. So it's important to have empathy for each other. And it's not, everything doesn't need to be ruled with an iron fist, but making sure that people understand that these are decisions that they make. Most people will acknowledge that giving a good effort is a choice, that working hard is a choice that you make. Most people will own that. But that means by default, if working hard is a choice, then not working hard is also a choice.
Right.
But that's the side of the equation most people won't own. That's the one where most people start to use these excuses. I didn't get sleep. I wasn't feeling well. I was hungry. And they start to add up. And there's a few things with that. One, we can take it a step back and say, well, whose fault is it that you're hungry? It's yours because you didn't eat. Whose fault is it that you're tired? It's yours because you didn't sleep. Like, I always want people to hold themselves accountable. Yes, having a toddler at home that doesn't sleep through the night makes it much more challenging to get a solid amount of sleep. Totally understand there. I've been there. I have 3 young kids. I get it. But it doesn't matter because that's only an excuse if you allow it to be one. So you come in for your training session and you're a little bit tired. I've been there. I've done that. I understand. But you still choose whether or not to give 100% during this workout or during this set, or if we really break it down, during this rep. That is still a choice. There's nothing we can do about the fact that your young infant kept you up last night. That's over. But you're choosing whether or not to give everything you've got right now, and that's a choice. And, the more we can get people, not just others, but look in the mirror to ourselves, to own these excuses and change the can'ts to won't, then you'll start to see them dissipate. You won't see them as often because most people aren't going to say, oh, I won't do another rep. They'll feel foolish even saying that. So, yeah, once we can flip the script on that, you'll see the excuses less often.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that because I used to catch people a lot, and I used to say the same thing. I'd say, "Hey, wait a minute, wait, you won't do it. It's not that you can't, but you won't." And I would always make the point, like you just did. There is a very distinct distinction between the two, and one is ownership. It's like, are you going to own? And to me, it suggests that a lot of people, and I'm curious on your 2 cents on this, that a lot of people are doing one of 2 things: they're either justifying their position, they're justifying where they are, or they're sort of arguing for their limitations. One of the two.
For sure.
They're either one of those 2 things. They're like, this is why I'm here. This is why I can't. This is what, and then I can't because, I don't have good enough genetics, or I don't have enough money, or this, like all these kinds of things. And don't get me wrong. I've been in all those positions. I've felt all those feelings. And at the end of the day, I know that they're just excuses like anything else. And greater things have been done by lesser people. so
for sure. Well, there's 2 approaches that I take. There's one where you would literally just say, so you tell me that Alan, I'm really tired. I didn't get to sleep last night. So today's workout's going to be tough. Okay. And and what? Okay. So either work or don't work. It's still your choice. Like, once we've established that, I'm not negating the fact that your excuse might be true and it might be valid. Not negating that. but what are we going to do moving forward? Those things are both in the past, so we don't have to worry about it. A kind of a less polite way would be able to say, I didn't get any sleep in the last.
So
I didn't eat breakfast this morning. So
I used to tell people.
That's not my worry right now.
I used to tell people that sounds like a personal problem. He's like, it's not my problem. That's a personal problem. That's funny. Yeah, absolutely. I find that when, like, you're right. I think taking ownership is probably critical to really. By the way, when you see me typing, I am paying attention. I take notes on everything that we talk about, so that way when I post it,
I love it.
I do, and I use my keyboard because I otherwise I'd be sitting down and going like this, and then everybody would see my thinning hair. I had a question here that I wanted to ask you, and it was just more of a reflective question. And of all the people that you've worked with, who is in your mind, maybe work with, or maybe know, or maybe you've observed, who in your mind is your quintessential or ideal champion, and why? What attributes do they have that make them into this sort of like, wow, I learned so much about being a champion from this guy or this gal. I have a few people in my mind that I have experienced and just gleaned little nuggets, little great things, sometimes really big pieces, but who is that person to you, and why is that person, why are they so profound for you?
Well, instead of even singling anybody out with a specific name, I'll kind of take an amalgam of a variety of people that I've been around, and I've noticed similar traits in all of them. The very first trait in all of them was passion. Like, they loved what it was that they were doing. Because I spent most of my time in basketball, that's where most of my experiences come from. They weren't playing basketball because they were tall and someone told them they should. They weren't playing basketball because they were pretty good at it and they knew they could make money playing it. They were doing it because they loved the sport. There was something about the game of basketball that just drew them in, and they're willing to make all of the sacrifices necessary because that's what they'd love. And even to this day, the guys that truly love the game, in the NBA, if you were to take away their money and their fame, within a day or two after the shock wore off, they'd probably be out on a court somewhere putting up shots because they love to play the game that much. So, having that passion is vital. The next is having a relentless work ethic, that it's almost an insatiable desire to improve. It's not so much about trying to be better than somebody else. It's trying to be the best that they can be. And I know that sounds corny and cliched, and it sounds like it should be on a Facebook meme, but it's so true, that they realize that the best measure of themselves is trying to, reach their full potential of what they're capable of. Another trait we've already discussed is being coachable, is having the humility to acknowledge that no matter how good they get at their craft, there's always going to be someone that can show them something to get them a little bit better. And, when you start to stack these things on top of each other, now you're building the foundation of what it takes to be a winner, or to be a high performer, to be a high achiever. And it's also the ability to focus on the things they have control over. You had mentioned kind of in passing before genetics, and, genetics do play a role in bodybuilding. They play a role in basketball. They play a role in everything that we do. In sport and in anything physical, our physical genetics certainly play a role. But, even in business, there are certain hardwirings in our DNA that make us more likely or less likely to be successful. But just like we've already talked about, regardless of what advantages or disadvantages you have, you can either use those as an excuse, or you can just realize that this is what I have. And, it's important to be able to do the most you can with what you have where you are. And, now, does every human being walking the earth have the genetic potential to be the world's #1 bodybuilder? No, of course not. Does every person walking the earth have the genetic potential to play in the NBA? No, of course not. That's one of the things that makes either one of those incredibly, unique and rare to be able to do that. But having those genetics is also not a front row seat to having anything handed to you. You still have to be able to put in the work. You still have to be willing to fall in love with the basics and to make sacrifices, and that's sometimes, I think, unfortunately, whether it's bodybuilding or basketball, people put too much emphasis on that. And,
they do.
We'll use LeBron James as an example.
Okay.
I know at the time of this recording, the Lakers failed to make the playoffs, but there's very little argument that LeBron is the best player in the world. Now, there's also little argument that he is a genetic specimen. I mean, he has almost the most perfectly designed basketball body in history. I mean, he's 6'9", 265, no body fat. I mean, he can run, he can jump, all of those things. But to just say that LeBron's the best because he was born with those tools is an absolute insult to the effort and work that he's put in during the unseen hours. There have been other human beings that have been born with a tremendous amount of physical potential that haven't amounted to jack squat because they weren't willing to do those things. And I'm sure, I'm not as privy to who's, in the bodybuilding world as much as I used to be. But same thing for whoever Mr. Olympia is going to be this coming year. To say that they're only good because of their genetics is an insult to their craft and to their work ethic. So there's a relationship between the two for sure.
Absolutely, 100%. I think genetics, when it comes to sports, genetics can give you a little bit of, it can sort of give you a little bit of a head start, sort of like hitting off the blue tees or the white tees, and go. Yep. But it certainly doesn't make your game for you. In bodybuilding, a great example of that is Flex Wheeler, who I think love Flex Wheeler. He's a nice fella, but should have been Mr. Olympia, probably the greatest genetic material that I've seen grace the stage, but never won. And he'll be the first to tell you. I talked to him at a show a couple of years ago when I was in Judge One in Kuwait. We sat down and we were talking, and I'm like, and this, of course, he's long since been retired, and we were talking a little bit about it, and I said, well, why don't you think that you ever won the Olympia? Because there was probably one year that he probably but there was several. It was several that he was second, third. He's always in the top, but just never could win. Dorian Yates was so dominant at the time than Ronnie Coleman. Well, he said, because my head wasn't right. He said it right. He's like, yeah. I thought the world owed me stuff. Yeah. He says, and I was wrong. He's like, so I'm like, oh, okay, well, at least you get that, and I knew him in the 90s, and yeah, probably thought it's probably the way he was. but when I look at success as a way of living, because I kind of think like this, then joy tends to be the fuel, the love of the game, the joy of life, yes. The joy of, and so that tends to be that sort of lighter fluid, that impetus that makes the person want to do all that stuff that nobody has to tell them to do, to get up at 4:00 in the morning to go practice, to get up and to study when nobody's telling you to do this stuff. I remember listening to, most people don't know this, but I'm not sort of a boxing fan, but I love Mike Tyson when he was in his heyday. And this dude, he was a serious student of the sport. Like he analyzed Rocky Marciano and all these great fighters and figured out what their strengths were and their weaknesses and who he was like and what kinds of things that he could do to emulate what they were doing. Really was a student of the sport, but we just remember him because it was knockout power. But he was really quite a student. I think that's a lot of the magic was that. But what would you say now? I don't know if I watched. He was on Joe Rogan's podcast this year. He was really cool to hear. To really hear him today talking about. But I didn't know this part that he was that Customato when he took him in. At the age of I think it was 13, 14 years old, he said every week, man, Cuss would have this guy come over. He was a hypnotist, and he would hypnotize him. And he would tell him, you're going to kill people. You're a champion. No one's going to beat you. You're just going to walk through people. And he's basically programming this kid from an early age to be this monster champion, which he became. I'm a big believer that your mindset, your attitude, what you believe about yourself is the indicator of what you're going to get back. So you're going to get out of your life exactly what you expect, what you believe from yourself. So how do you approach that? Because there's so many limiting beliefs that many people are trying to get past. They don't realize it's a belief that you hold that is not valid for you. If you're looking for this one outcome and you believe that you can't have it because your genetics aren't good or because you have some disability in life, money or relationships, or you don't know anybody or what opportunity, but how do you get past that? How do you approach that?
Well, it takes work. And one of the things that unites all of us, I mean, we all have limiting beliefs. The difference between the highest achievers and the highest performers are they've learned to mitigate them or eliminate them or minimize most of them, which is why they're able to perform at a high level. But, I know I have limiting beliefs that I'm still trying to overcome and to try to break through, because you're 100% right. They're all self-imposed. They're basically just the equivalent of putting handcuffs on yourself. No one else is limiting you. And, one of the things that does separate sport, whether it's bodybuilding and basketball or business, we'll stick with the 3 Bs, is the physical component is obviously not a big deal in the business world. I mean, I do believe that you should maintain a certain level of physical fitness in order for your mind and soul and spirit to be right. But we're talking about, how important it is to be able to do some of these things. The genetics is what we keep talking about in bodybuilding, whether it's flex wheeler or we're talking about basketball with LeBron James. But in business, those things become less apparent, which means there's less excuse that someone could come up with in business for not being born with the right tools, because it doesn't matter how tall you are, what your body fat percentage is in business. Now, certainly there's some inner wirings, and we could talk about IQ and EQ and some other things there that would lend to being more successful in business. But in all honesty, it's a much more level playing field than it is, in sport. So that's one of the neat things about business. But yeah, everybody is going to have a variety of different limiting beliefs, and a lot of them were implanted in us when we were children. And,
yes.
It's certainly not too late for me to overcome mine. I do some personal work to overcome them, but where I'm really hypersensitive is with my own children and making sure that I'm not falsely implanting any limiting beliefs in them. And, one of the things that because I'm a stickler for terminology and I really love words. And
me too.
And I tell my kids all the time, you can't be anything you want to be, but you can be anything you deserve to be. And the difference is you have to be willing to earn it. Like, you can just sit around wanting to be whatever you want. You can want to be in the NBA. You can want to be the president of the United States. You can want those things all you want. But unless you earn them and deserve them by putting in the work during the unseen hours, then you won't have them. So to me, making that connection with my children that, I don't want to put any limiting belief on you. Whatever it is that you want to create, whatever you want to be, whatever mark you want to leave on the world, if you're willing to make the sacrifices and put in the work, then those things are all possible for you. But I think sometimes we get a little too esoteric and just tell kids, hey, whatever you want to be, you can be. Well, you're missing a big piece of the pie, and that's putting in the work to deserve it. I know plenty of people that want to be in the NBA, but I also know plenty of people that aren't willing to do what's required to make that happen. And same thing in business. I mean, I don't know what the stats are now. It's like, 8 out of 10 startups fail within the first 3 years. The odds are very stacked against you, but if you're willing to do the work required, you can make that happen.
I would say to somebody, especially in sports, but this goes true for any endeavor. If you really want something fantastic, really want something great, then you want to do the work, because it's one it's one and the same, right? It's one and the same.
Yes.
So it's fascinating that so when you look at I kind of, because that resonates with me, because I'm trying to do the same kinds of things with my children, with my daughter who's 10. And except I'm trying to reinforce. I really take care to reinforce how she, for her to pay attention to how she feels. How important, you mentioned emotional emotional intelligence earlier. How important is that in your talks and when you look at athletes and stuff like that? When it comes to success?
It's especially when we're talking about the business world. But if we just talk about success in general, I believe EQ far outweighs IQ. Now, depending on the specific vocation of what it is that you want to be, if you want to be an astrophysicist, then yes, a certain amount of IQ is going to be required. There's no question about that. But when it comes to just generally being successful, being an effective and impactful leader and teammate, being able to add and contribute to the culture of your team or your organization, EQ is by far the most important, because EQ is not only being able to know yourself, but it's being able to manage your emotions. It's being able to understand others. It's being, and here's what I do in a lot of my workshops. I'll ask folks to just start shouting out the qualities of the most effective leaders that they know of, and they start shouting them out. And then I'll say, okay, let's just switch gears a little bit. How about of the best teammates? The best teammates that you ever had, whether it was in Little League when you were 6 years old or it's someone on your team now, what are the best teammate qualities? And they start shouting them out. And while they're doing it, I'm writing these on a dry erase board or on a flip chart in a black marker. And I wait till we get till about 30 of them. And then I say, okay. And then I pull out a red Sharpie and I say, all right, now yell out the ones that are on this list of 30 that have to do with your IQ. And it's usually a very awkward silence for a few seconds. And at best, if someone had yelled out knowledge to make the list, I want a leader that's knowledgeable. Okay, that's cool. Then maybe I'll circle that one. But very rarely on a list of 30, will there ever be more than 2 or 3 that have to do with IQ? Almost all of them have to do with EQ. And the point being, if you want to be an influential leader, you want to be an impactful teammate, you want to be someone of influence that fills other people's buckets, whether you're a trainer, whether you're a coach, whether you're a CEO, it skews heavily towards the EQ. And to me, that's one of the issues with school curriculums these days is they're far weighted towards the IQ. It's all about grades and test scores and being able to memorize and regurgitate facts and material. And I'm not saying that stuff is not worthwhile to some capacity, but it's so loaded that all we seem to care about in our school curriculum is IQ. Yet when you get out in the real world, if you want to be successful and happy and significant and fulfilled, you need a very high EQ. Doesn't really seem like our schools are preparing our young people for what they need to be successful. And I think that's a major problem.
I do. I agree 100%. Our school, our education system is behind the curve when it comes to this stuff because it prepared us well for the Industrial Revolution, the Industrial Age, to be workers, to have workers. Don't question. Here's what you need to know. Yes, no, this is good, this is bad, this is the right answer, this is the wrong answer. Well, today we have a lot more fluid society. We have more ideas. It's just a lot more complex in nature. And of course, we don't have the industries that are running the world are not really the same industries anymore. We don't prepare our kids to go to work in the plants. Right. So they don't have to know how to do this part here and like this repetitive kind of a thing. No, and shut up and be nice, Johnny. Like they don't have to know that anymore. Now you can you can make your own rules as long as you're getting along well with others. It's really kind of exciting actually. I've always been one that loves technology, and so ever since I remember thinking the very first thing that I thought when I originally got out of graduate school and started working at Oracle. I was their number one sales guy year one. That I went out there. Nobody thought I could get a job at this company. They only wanted Ivy League people, and I came from Oregon State University with a graduate work in theology. I went to seminary, so it was totally it was your atypical sort of person. But I remember really it was nobody thought that I could do this job first of all, and then of course I was the best at it in the company year one, and it was I really believed it was because of my ability to be able to assess and relate and develop rapport with my customers, to hear what they had to say and respond to that. But more importantly, also, I was willing to work. I mean, when everybody else was out there playing golf, man, when I hit my numbers, I was still working because this was about the money for me. Now, flash forward, like 20 or so years and where I'm at today, 25 years, and I can tell you that I don't do anything for the money anymore. As a matter of fact, that's the last thing on my mind. I like money. I just don't do it for the money. Right. I do it I want to be able to wake up every day. And as I walk through each activity of my day, I want to be excited about it. I want it to feel good and fun. And I want it to have value for my own life and others. I always hesitate when I say stuff like add value to others because it sounds cliche, but it's the truth because I know how good it feels when I add value to others. But it's that good feeling that I'm really after. I love it that it helps others. But if I could get that feeling without helping anybody, I'd do that too. Absolutely. So what kind of when you look at emotional quotient, this IQ versus EQ, I think what would you tell people is the most important thing about understanding emotionally how to be successful. Because to me, it's all about joy, but that's the way I describe it. I'm deeply in contact. It's my deepest desire on a daily basis to always be present and to always know how I feel, why I feel the way I do, and to move with this ebb and flow in my life, to listen to it. But that's, again, this is how I've evolved, and I'm also always been a very emotional person. I've always very close contact with my emotions. I was encouraged by my mother to talk about how I felt, and that was the first question she asked me. Every problem, it was always, well, how do you feel about that, Tad? I'm
right.
like, oh man, that was the question. And I had to have an answer. It's like, okay, we'll just sit on your bed. I'll come back in 20 minutes and we can talk about it. Like, that's the kind of childhood I grew up with. Well, there was some spankings in there too, but it's okay. But tell me just tell people a little bit about what the emotional quotient really is talking about, and how that's critical to success in terms of what we're talking about here.
Well, the foundation of emotional intelligence is, and you mentioned that you're a big Gary Vee fan, and I am as well. And one of the things he talks about all the time, which I am 100% in support of, is how important self-awareness is. Mm-hmm. And self-awareness, there's a reason it's the first chapter of my book, Raise Your Game, because it is that important, and it is the foundation to which the rest of the house is built. And in order to achieve a certain level of emotional intelligence, it does start with self-awareness. And we can look at self-awareness on a few different levels. One, it's certainly knowing yourself. That part sounds kind of obvious, but most people freely embrace the good stuff. They know what they love. They know what they're good at. They know what, where their passion lies. They know, their hopes and their dreams. They know that stuff, but they tend to shy away from the other side, the darker side. What are your fears? What are your insecurities? What things aren't you very good at? What things do you really dislike doing? What parts about yourself do you not like? And it's being able to balance both of those. So that's one level of self-awareness. And, what's kind of funny is in order to achieve that level of self-awareness, you often have to ask others. And I know that doesn't sound very intuitive, but true. The reason I say that is because the true definition of self-awareness is making sure that there is alignment and harmony between the way you see yourself and the way the rest of the world sees you. I mean, it's very true in bodybuilding as well. I mean, you might think your calves look a certain way, but all of the judges say they don't. Well, guess what? They don't. We'll use listening. That's how we started this conversation. If I think that I'm a world-class active listener, but you ask the 5 people that know me the best, and they all say, no, Tad, Alan's an awful listener. Well, then that means there's a disconnect between what I think and what the rest of the world sees. And ultimately, if the 5 people closest to me say I'm not a good listener, then I'm probably not a good listener. If the 5 judges say your quads, don't have the right striations, then guess what? They don't. It doesn't matter what you think. So it's important to make sure that there's some harmony there. And as comical as it is, if I were to acknowledge that I'm not a very good listener and the people around me said, yeah, he's not a good listener, I would actually have a higher sense of self-awareness. Because I would see myself in harmony with the way the rest of the world sees me. And, that part and that alone is vital.
That piece right there is not only vital, but it's very difficult for people to do. Very difficult for people to acknowledge, hey, man, I really suck at this. Like, I need to work on this. They might say things like, let's set bodybuilding aside, because it's kind of expected that people will know we all have weaknesses and we all have to work on these things. But when it comes to you as a person, it's like, I suck, I'm not a very good listener, or whatever it is that we want to improve in our life. I don't know if I listen to my wife very good, or I don't know or whatever it is. How do you get people? That's something that I think that it's hard to get people to really sort of embrace and acknowledge. Say, look, because you said it best. I mean, the only way you're going to move beyond it is if you first become aware of it. You got to acknowledge it. You got to say, hey, look, this is an issue that I have, and I want to become better at this. If you already believe that you're perfect at it, then there's no need to change it, right? So,
without question.
And so it kind of insinuates that by not acknowledging it.
And here's one of the things I think is cool when we just talk about emotional intelligence. And we talked about technology, and I do think there's some wonderful parts about technology, but I do think there are some things that are eroding our ability to naturally build an emotional intelligence. And as a parent, that's one of the most difficult tug of wars that I have, because I want my children to enjoy the fruits of technology. I want them to enjoy some cool games on their iPads and do some things that I know I would have done if I was a child. I want them to be technically savvy, because whatever vocation they're going to have when they're older is going to require some type of technological component. So I don't want them to be behind the eight ball, but I also don't want them to be so used to using technology that it erodes their emotional intelligence and their ability to connect with others. But so I'm a little bit younger than you are. I'm 43. And when I think back when I was a teenager and, basketball was my main passion, on a Saturday. Now this is, the technology back when I was a teenager, we had an Atari. I think Nintendo was just starting to come out, and it wasn't near what kids are able to play with today. But on a typical Saturday, I would pack a cooler with some Gatorades in it. I'd walk probably a mile and a half, or sometimes take my bike down to the park. And it would be in the summer, it would be 100 degrees out in that East Coast humidity. So it's disgustingly hot out on a black concrete surface. And there'd be 25 teenagers that would show up to play basketball, and we would have to police ourselves. We would have to decide to collectively, someone would have to exercise some leadership and say, okay, this is going to be the main court. This is going to be the side court. Here's how we're going to choose teams. We're going to shoot for captains, and then we're going to pick teams. And you're going to pick based on who you believe would give you the best chance of winning, because that way you got to stay on the main court, because losers take a walk, winners get to stay. So it's no longer about your friends anymore. It's about, I'm going to pick the guys that are going to do the things to help me win. So if I know, Tad, that you're a lazy llama bean and you're not going to sprint back and play defense because all you're worried about is chucking up 3-pointers, I'm not going to pick you because you give me less of a chance to win. And that's going to do a couple things. One, I'm learning the discernment of what it takes to build a team to be successful. And two, when you start to see that you're hardly ever picked, hopefully it's going to increase your self-awareness that, hey, I apparently don't bring the value to this game that I thought I did, because no one wants me on their team. So maybe there's some things that I need to change. And during the game, we decide what score we're going to play to. We call our own fouls. If there's an argument over the foul, we have to decide a way to resolve it. And of course, sometimes it would be shoot for ball. Other times it would literally come down to a fist fight, with testosterone. But nevertheless, we policed ourselves and we decided how we would resolve it. And we would stay out there, 8, 10, 12 hours a day until we were covered in sweat and blacktop asphalt, and we're out there in the uncomfortable hot sun. And I mean, but all of that stuff created the perfect laboratory to create emotional intelligence, to learn what it is that you brought to a team and did well, to learn what it is that you sought after in others, to learn how to create your own rules and police and work out and have tough conversations and resolve disagreements, to be able to patiently wait your turn if you lost, but then be so hungry to win the next time that you don't have to sit out, that you're willing to dive for loose balls and skin your knees, or you're willing to do the little things. All of that stuff created the perfect storm. And there is no doubt in my mind that those formative years of me going down to the park to play basketball helped me develop the skill sets that I now utilize today, not only as a professional speaker and as an author, but as a father, as somebody in my community, as a private business owner and entrepreneur, as someone that tries to keep himself mentally, physically, and emotionally fit. All of that stuff has helped create that. And that's where I get a little bit worried with today's young people, at the risk of sounding like an old fogey, is that we don't tend to give them those opportunities to work on their craft of emotional intelligence. We have too many kids just sitting on the couch playing iPad, and they're not able to have those opportunities. And I'm forever grateful that I was able to go through things like that, because they've taught me a vast majority of the skills that I use today.
I totally agree. I tend to take a slightly different perspective on it. That it will make that I agree 100% actually with what you said, 100%, because I remember those days being out there in the park with your buddies and spend all day out there, and you develop these skills, these relationship building skills, these things about how you form relationships and how you keep them, and these kinds of things. But also that like you said, in today's day and age, the skill sets, the social skill sets are very different. People are texting, they're in social media, whatever. but they're not exactly the same. They're not getting the same experience.
Right.
And there's a lot of worry about that. But I think what it'll really do is it'll make the few step up, because there's always those people who are going to, and they're going to lead the way. And then you and I learned how to do this by default. We were put in situations and we learned, but the newer generation will learn because they know they have to. And that's exciting, because then they become really good. They take it like, I wish that I could have taken it. I remember being in high school. I got involved in bodybuilding at 15 because I was such a tiny kid. I was 97 pounds when I was 15, and I was low self-esteem. And so it really helped build my self-esteem. I wanted to feel good about me, and that's why I got involved in it. And it did. It helped me. It showed me also that, I could change my body. Well, I could change more than that. And I started to do all these other things. Well, I think if I had known that this kind of thing was a skill that would take my career to just skyrocketing heights, then I would have been like, okay, what do I need to do to increase my emotional intelligence? Like, what do I need to do? How can I be a better listener? How can I, I would have just been on fire like I am today. Now I read more today. I meditate every day. I have a whole ritual process. And that was going to be another question I asked, because I've been asking this question a lot lately. Especially people who understand success, that I read somewhere, I can't remember where it was recently, that most of the successful people that I've seen and who are interviewed, when they're asked, almost all of them have a morning process. Almost all of them have a process every morning they go through that helps them focus themselves for their day. I do. I came up with a process. It's just something that evolved in my life. I meditate. I get up. I meditate for usually about 20 to 45 minutes. It depends on how I'm feeling. But generally it's about 20 to 30 minutes. And then I do my morning stuff, and then I grab my phone. I don't like to touch my phone until I'm in a good centered state. And then I can respond. What's your morning process, and what do you think is important?
Oh, and I absolutely have one. In fact, every single person listening to this has a morning routine. The question is, did they design it with intention and purpose, or have they just haphazardly fallen backwards into it? But we are creatures of habit. There was a Duke University study that showed that 45% of everything we do during our waking hours is habitual. That means almost half of everything we do from the moment we wake up to the moment we go to bed is on autopilot and is on cruise control. And for me, and I tweak my morning routines all of the time. I mean, my morning routine today is not the same as it was a couple years ago, but I found one now that gets me primed mentally, physically, and emotionally, and ready to tackle the day. And I'll continue to learn and adapt and change. So my morning routine a year from now might be a little bit different, but it will be because I've up-leveled. I'm very similar to you. I make sure that I stay off of my phone first thing. The very first thing I do is I make my bed every single morning. And I've been doing that for 26 years.
My mother would love you.
Yeah, well,
that's the first thing she does. I do.
It's a simple win, and it's a sign of discipline, and I believe it's a great way to get the momentum of the day by having a small victory and a small sign of discipline. I know that the human body loses a tremendous amount of water when you're sleeping, so I also drink, and I prefer room temperature water. I don't like really cold water, but I drink a bottle or two of cold water as soon as I wake up. I've got kind of a breathing routine that I do where I'm kind of bouncing around and jumping around to the equivalent of if I was jumping rope, although I don't actually have a rope. And I do a minute of breathe in through my nose, out through my nose. Then I go in through my nose, out through my mouth for a minute. Then in through my mouth, out through my mouth for a minute. And I'm taking pretty big inhales. Then I rest for a minute, and then I do the same thing in reverse. So in through the mouth, out through the mouth, in through the nose, out through the mouth, in through the nose.
What is that part of your process? What is that?
I'm just it's just kind of a way to prime not only my respiratory system. It certainly gets my heart rate going. I mean, you're literally bouncing
kind of wakes you up a bit.
For 6 minutes. Yeah. It just gets the blood flowing. But it oxygenates your brain. It oxygenates, all of the muscles of your body. I
like that.
Right from there, then I do a series of yoga poses. Some of them are just more traditional stretches, but some of them are kind of yoga-ish poses. Some cobra and some down dog and some warrior one and all that good stuff. And I do that for maybe on the low end 8 to 10 minutes. If I really need it, maybe 15. But I get a good active stretch. I meditate as well, but I choose to follow the Headspace guided meditation app.
Okay.
And it's 10 minutes long, and it's literally a guy just kind of walking you through it. And I lay in silence when I do that. So basically, so far, I've made my bed, takes 10 seconds. I drink some water, takes 10 seconds. I do the breathing, which from start to finish takes 7 minutes, 6 minutes with the 1 minute in between. Then I stretch for anywhere from 8 to 20 minutes, depending on how I'm feeling. The meditation is a solid 10 minutes each time. And it actually can keep a track of how many consecutive days that you've meditated. And at the time of this recording, this morning was my 634th straight day of doing a 10-minute meditation using the Headspace app.
Oh, wow.
And as soon as I'm done the meditation, if I'm not working out that day, then I go right to take a quick 3-minute cold shower, which is cold shower. It's miserable when I'm in it, but is invigorating when I get out. If I am working out that day, at present, my workouts consist of 2 things. I either go take a Bikram hot yoga class, or I go do a full body strength workout and do weights and so forth. And my goal is to get 2 of each week. So either 2 hot yoga classes and 2 strength workouts. So that would be 4 days a week. The other 3 is when I'd head right to the shower. If I'm doing one of the workouts, then as soon as my meditation's over, I'll go to those workouts and take the cold shower after. And then I'm primed and ready to go. I've been on an intermittent fasting diet for about a year, so I very rarely eat before noon or 1, and I do an 18-6 split. So I really only eat between noon and 6 every day, and I found that that's helped tremendously with my quality of sleep. It's helped with my mental acuity.
Yeah, I do the same thing. Actually, I do the same thing. I actually do much of the same thing. Of course, I used to live a very bodybuilding lifestyle where I was eating more times a day. But after I retired, I have it's the type of eating that you're talking about is more precisely called time restricted eating. Yeah, it's a type of intermittent fasting. Wonderful. I have a lot of clients on it. I absolutely fell in love with it. It's the way our bodies naturally want to operate. They don't want to, but I always like to say that when you look at somebody's morning process, their daily process, especially their morning process, you can tell a lot about a person.
Oh, for sure.
You can tell a lot about a person. If it's intent.
And it's cause and effect. I mean, right now, without question, I'm the happiest, most fulfilled, and quite frankly, the most successful that I've ever been in my life. And this is also, no coincidence, the time where my morning routine is the most structured and the most regimented and the most, contributing to that. And when I look back at some times where things have been a little fuzzy, where I don't think I was performing anywhere closer, I wasn't near as into my morning routine. And, it's like anything else. I mean, we all have good days and bad days. And there's some days where my morning routine is immaculate and it's incredibly precise and it's full of energy. And then there's other times where, I'm kind of gutting through it. I don't feel like doing the breathing today, but I've conditioned myself to do it anyway, even if I don't feel like it. And, for me, it reframes my entire mind and body to be able to take on whatever the rest of the day is. And I very much consider myself an energy giver, a bucket filler. Like you, I take tremendous pride in pouring into others. And I've learned that the only way I can do that to the best of my ability is if I take care of myself. Yeah. And that morning routine, I owe it to the people that I care about, and I owe it to the people I serve, whether it's my children or in this case, the listeners of your podcast. I owe it to those people to be at my best. And it would actually be selfish of me not to have a morning routine that allows me to be my best, because then I'm going to be a mediocre father. I'm going to be a mediocre guest on your show. I'm going to be mediocre next time I give a keynote talk. And that's not coming from a place of service. So for me, that morning routine is not just for me. It's for everybody that I attempt to serve in a day.
I like what I 100% like what you have to say. I think that when it comes to when I see people who give so much to others, mothers, I work with over the years, I've worked with a lot of mothers and stuff, and they tend to give more than what they receive sometimes, or at least it feels that way to them oftentimes. I kind of tend to see, and I'd like to get it would be great to get your 2 cents on this piece. When I see somebody interacting with other people, what we give to others is so much, in my mind, a reflection of what you give to yourself. I don't see somebody if somebody who really, really, truly has self-love, who knows their value, who reaffirms their physicality by eating healthy, by doing good things, by putting good stuff in their mind, not beating themselves up, and then they go and they give to others. They have the most resources to give. But it's the ones that don't, and I see them interacting, and they're mean, or maybe they're a little biting, they're a little vicious, or they're a little frustrated, or they're angry, and it's always a reflection. They'll tell you that it has to do with the subject matter they're talking about or dealing with, but I would tell you that has to do with what's going on inside. And so, what are you giving? What are you filling your cup with? Is it anger? Is it love? Is it understanding? What is it? Because you're spilling it out. So what would you? I try my best. This is why my meditations are focused on. I do emptying meditations where I empty my mind and I try to exist and acknowledge the appreciation for me. It's just, I'm here, man. I'm here, and it's good. There's nothing bad going on. It's all good. Everything is good. Even the bad stuff that seemingly seems bad is working to my advantage. It's moving it's moving me in directions that I never thought was possible, to my benefit. My life is for my benefit. And if I take that perspective, then it's easy for me to see the benefit. But when I don't take the perspective, it's not. So what would you say, when it comes to when it comes to filling your own cup up with the good stuff? You have a great process for doing some of that. What about the emotional side of it?
Well, it just comes down to the mind shift that you have to realize that you're not doing it for selfish reasons. You're actually doing it in service of others. Right. And I do think our society gets those, unfortunately, backwards, where if you take me time, that's considered selfish. And you mentioned mothers, especially in today's day and age. I think working mothers have it incredibly hard because they're serving their place of employment or their business, they're serving their children, they're serving their spouse, and if they're not wise about it and taking me time to themselves, they're going to burn out and they're going to run themselves ragged, and they're not going to be able to be the best mother or the best wife or the best business owner or what have you, and that's a problem. So it is important that we create these boundaries and we make sacrifices, as we've talked about, and we look to pour into ourselves first so that we can then give freely to others. And that is, it's a tough mind shift, because more times than not, you allow people to steal your time. So you spend all of your time trying to please others and serve others, and then there's just not enough hours in the day. So you start to, you give up on your workouts, you give up on trying to eat healthy, you give up on trying to get enough sleep, you give up on doing all of the things that allow you to be the best you can be, and you let everyone else siphon off your time, then we've got a problem.
Yeah, I'd be interested to hear what you have to say about this perspective, because when we talk about things like this, we talk about making sacrifices, right? You and I know, coming out of sports, that there's a great deal of sacrifice that has to be made. There's some things that you may want to do at the time, whether it be eating or whether it be doing something with friends or whatever, and you just can't do it. If you really truly have the desire to be the best at this craft that you've decided on, then you're going to have to invest some time into it. But I would say I would like to change the dialogue on that. I would like to rest. I would like to, because I'm always talking to clients and trying to give them a different perspective so they can see it somewhat differently, come at it from a different point of view, because we hear things like be our best self, and we hear that it starts to become cliche and loses a lot of its value. Like, enjoy the process. When I first started saying that in the 90s, it was a little more a newer feeling than it is today, right? Love the process. Wonderful. It's absolutely accurate, but sometimes it loses some of its zest because we hear it so much now from people. But it's true. We both admit that it's true. But how I would like to change that terminology, instead of saying making, because I never saw every workout I did, every meal, every engagement that I missed with friends when I was in college or when I was an adult, man, it was not a sacrifice. Right. It was not a sacrifice, because a sacrifice would have been me going to Pizza Hut with my buddies and eating pizza and drinking beer. That would have been a sacrifice to my body. But to me, it was not a sacrifice, man. This was not a sacrifice. So I'm trying to find a way to flip it, and just change the terminology so that people can see that, you don't have to sacrifice. You get to indulge yourself on all this stuff that you love. But if you don't really love it, if you only love what you think you're going to get from it, the titles, the wins, the trophies, then you're dead in the water. But like you said, if you love the process, if you love the act of it, then you crack the code. Then all you got to do is focus on that. So what have you done to help people sort of move that? Because I know you have to have seen that mind shift that where the people's like, I want to be a champion. And what they're really talking about is I want either the money or I want everyone to talk good about me. One of the two, like, right? They want one of the, they don't really, being a champion, like, I'm pretty sure that if you ask Kobe what his idea of being a champion is all about, it has nothing, it's a very personal thing.
Most certainly. I mean, it's that self-fulfillment. And I'll say this, and then I feel like we could just keep this thing going for hours and hours. I've got a hard stop in a couple minutes. Okay. I want to make sure we end on a very high note, but what's funny is it still comes back to when you saying a lot of these things are cliche, and I agree. Unfortunately, they've gotten to the point where they are, and they're a little bit overplayed on T-shirts and on Facebook memes, but it still goes back to that concept of the basics. The reason these concepts are still around after being said ad nauseum for 20 years is because they are true. What you just said is 100% true. But we have to find, and part of having an emotional intelligence is knowing someone well enough and knowing ourselves well enough to figure out how we need to kind of flip the script and change the scenery so that it becomes something that resonates more with us. So if telling someone you got to fall in love with the process, if they're just rolling their eyes at that, then you have to find another way to be able to communicate that to them that means the same thing. One of the things I've always kind of laughed at in coaching and in parenting, take a basketball coach, for example, and we're at practice and I yell at you, Tad, why aren't you boxing out? I've told you 1,000 times that I need you to box out. Well, whose fault is that? If I've told you something 1,000 times and you're still not doing it, that's on me. That means I'm an ineffective communicator. If I've told you something 1,000 times and it's still not getting through, that's not on you. That is now on me, and I have to be able to own that. So I think anytime someone says, if I've told you 1,000 times or I've told you 100 times, that just means you're an idiot because you keep saying it the same way and it's not working. So the key is being able to find another way to get that message across, find another way to plant that same seed and fill that same bucket. And that's what having an emotional intelligence is all about. It's being able to decipher, here's the message that I need this person to know, and what is the best language that I can speak, the best way that I can come at them to get them to process that. And, you've been around sport your whole life. There's some people that you can be very direct with. You could yell, you could scream, you could curse at them, and they'll respond very well to that. And then there's another group of people that won't respond well to that. You have to coddle them a little bit more. You have to kind of do the proverbial arm around the shoulder. And it doesn't matter which way you like. It doesn't matter if you think one way is right and one way is wrong. The key is being able to get your message across equally and effectively to either person. And that's why for more times than not, that old school mentality, if you think of like a Bobby Knight type coach who only coached one way, is not near as prevalent today because you have to be able to have the emotional intelligence to get through to anyone. And even with my own 3 children, I need to speak to each of them slightly differently in order to get the message across. If I had to talk to all 3 of them and my goal was for them to clean their room, I would not be able to deliver the same message in the same way to all 3 of them. I would have to cater the message to each of them in a way that would get them to do that. And, for example, for my one son, I could kind of turn it in a game. I bet you can't clean your room in 5 minutes. I know there's no way you could clean your room in 5 minutes, man. That thing is a mess. He would see that as a competition and he would rise to the challenge. Then another one would say, I would really appreciate it if you'd clean your room. I think, whatever, but I would be able to attack each one in a different way. And that's ultimately what emotional intelligence is. And I'm hoping puts kind of a bow on our entire conversation.
Absolutely.
Of everything that we've talked about. Taking those approaches would be very basic, but they wouldn't necessarily be easy to learn. But if you do, it's certainly worth the time invested.
Absolutely. I agree 100%. I'm 100% agree. I have 2 last questions before we leave this session.
Sure. And
I ask these questions of everybody, and I usually come up with the third one I could. So, but these are they're sort of form questions. I like to get people's responses. The first question is, in your life to date, what have you seen or do you see ahead? It could be, you could position it either way you want, as your biggest challenge. What has been your biggest challenge, or what do you foresee being your biggest challenge in the future? Either way is acceptable to answer.
My biggest daily challenge is something you've touched on, is staying in the present moment and being present, because like everyone else listening to this, I'm constantly being bombarded and pulled in a million different directions. I've got a million things that are vying for my attention, some in human form and some digitally, and learning how to be in the present moment and only focus on my own attitude and my own effort and disregard everything else is something that I'm very proud to say that I'm getting better at. I'm far from mastering it, but I'm on the road to constant improvement with that. But that is without question my biggest daily challenge.
That's my biggest challenge too. And by the way, I always remind myself throughout the day. I always remind myself, Tad, everything right now in your now is right. Now,
Yes.
this is the most important part of your day right now, yes. And no matter what's going on.
Stress is 100% caused by the desire for things to be different than they are in the present moment.
Yep.
That's what stress is desiring things to be different than they are in the present moment.
Absolutely.
If you have a flat tire on the side of the highway and it's freezing and it's dark and it's raining out, obviously you wish things were different.
Right.
But if you're not willing to embrace and accept that that's the way things are, that's why we have stress.
Yeah, exactly. Well, precisely. And I think a lot of times it's kind of funny because a side note, my girlfriend's a doctor and my ex-wife was a nurse practitioner, and I used to ask this question all the time. And if you look at polls, this reflects it. The most common complaints when going to a family practice doctor or going to the doctor's office is like 70%, 77% is anxiety or depression.
Oh,
now, so and anxiety and depression, from my way of thinking, is the same thing. It's exactly what you're talking about. Is this looking? See, anxiety and worry is looking into your future, and presupposing negative outcomes. Going, hey man, like this could happen. What if this happens? Like, can I do this? Can I have this? Can I pay this?
Yep.
And sadness and regret and depression is usually looking behind you, looking in the past, going, hey man, I screwed up here. I didn't do this. I didn't do this. It's like both those scenarios are the exact opposite of mindfulness of living in your now.
Absolutely.
And so those are the biggest reasons why I focus so much on my now. But it's certainly something that I think our contemporary culture today with cell phones and stuff like that, we need to really sort of, I'm glad to hear that meditation and mindfulness is taking hold or getting a lot more popular in the last couple of years.
Absolutely.
The second question I have, which is a little bit, this is super easy question to answer, especially in relationship to the first one. In your life today, what's your biggest blessing?
My children, and being able to have a strong connection and relationship with them is, I'm very thankful. I absolutely don't even attempt to live vicariously through them. I respect that they're on their own journey and they're doing their own thing. But it's kind of neat because they'll say or do something that brings me back to some childhood memories that I had and things that they're doing. So my kids is definitely number one. But not that far behind that. I'm incredibly grateful and thankful to have my health. Both mentally and physically and emotionally. And I'm thankful to do what I love to do for a living and be able to provide for my family, doing something that I'm really passionate about and that I'd like to believe I'm pretty good at. And, finding that intersection between what you love and what you're good at, when you find where those 2 points intersect, the more time you can spend there, the happier you'll be.
Absolutely. And I think that's the best part of when I think of myself as a father. My best teachings come from my doing, my example. And the best example that I know is to do what you love. I won't ever tell my daughter to have a certain kind of career, go to a certain college. I will help her in any mode that she wishes to operate in her life. But what I want the most for her in her life is for her to feel her power, know how special she is, know how special we all are, and that intrinsically we're not different. And two, that her joy is her entitlement in this life. She doesn't have to earn it, doesn't have to work for it. It's hers if she wishes it to be. But misery is also her entitlement if she wishes it. so it's a choice that we make, and whether you realize it or not, we make it. Well, Alan, thank you so much for taking the time. I really appreciate it. You, my kind of guy. I love talking about this stuff. I could talk to you for probably like 3 or 4 hours on this stuff because it's Absolutely. My kind of conversations. Tell everybody where they can reach you and how they can get a hold of you if they want to get a hold of you and hire you for any kind of engagements or talk to you.
For sure. Well, anyone listening, if you're interested in the book, it's called Raise Your Game, High Performance Secrets from the Best of the Best. I got a little plug behind me there. And you can just go to raiseyourgamebook.com. If you're interested in anything else I've got going on, you can just go to alansteinjr.com. For my keynotes and workshops. And if you're active on social, whether it's Instagram, Twitter, whatever, at Alan Stein Jr. on those. I love interacting with folks on social. So, if you enjoyed our conversation as much as I did, please drop me a line on there, and it would be great to connect. I'll
put your link to your book in the notes and
awesome.
in the video, in the YouTube thing, and as well as my other social media stuff. I totally appreciate you taking the time, Alan. This has been a wonderful conversation. I truly appreciate it. Stay on the line after I stop recording. But thank you so much again for giving your perspective. And I totally. But by the way, it's wonderful to talk to somebody who I love talking to people when I go, oh yeah. Maybe it's just because it validates me, but I don't know.
For sure. Well, I enjoyed it just as much. Thanks, Tad.
Handle your high with Tadayoshi.